What is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today. We are live on a Monday here at 5, a little after 5 o'clock, but hey, you know what? We got there nonetheless. I am Sean Murphy, joined by the man, the myth, the talk, Pistons talk is with us. Anthony, my guy, how are you doing today? Thanks so much for being here. Happy trade deadline week to you and to all those who celebrate.
Yeah, this is gonna be chaotic. I love it. It's like Christmas around this time of year, all the trade
Yep.
rumors. Always fun when I get to do a podcast with you. I always say the podcasts I do with you are some of my favorites because we go in 50 different directions and it doesn't even feel like we're doing a podcast. I feel like we're just shooting the shit in the bar. Like I love it.
Oh, absolutely. It just feels like you and I are sitting at a Chili's with our jalapeno poppers and got a basketball game on in the background. Like these are literally the same conversations that you and I would have off air as we're going to have on air. So that's what I appreciate, about, our chats and whenever we get to have them. I always love going on your podcasts. And if people don't know, which if you listen to this podcast, but Anthony, at Pistons Talk on pretty much all the social media platforms. He's his podcast, is doing great stuff. He's with the Believe Network now, sponsored by FanDuel, so doing big things. He also, does a lot of great updates and just releases great content all throughout Instagram, X, Facebook, wherever pretty much wherever you're on social media, he's there releasing the latest and greatest Pistons content. So, if you're not following him, then you're making a massive mistake. And in fact, I'm doing a little bit of a 180, but it just kind of feels like this fits here now that I've been kind of hyping it up. Here's a little bit of an example of something that Anthony, shared from the broadcast that kind of seemed to blow up a little bit over, over the weekend. Here's JB Bickerstaff talking about where he foresees, potentially the deadline and just talking about parity in the league.
For a dynasty to take place, you have to be really good and you have to be really lucky. And, I think what you look over the past 5 or 6 years now, how it's been a new champion every year. I think that's great for the league because it puts pressure on teams to go for it because the opportunity is there. So
it forces teams to go for it because the opportunity is there. What type of team could he possibly be referring to there, Anthony?
I don't know. Are the Detroit Pistons in first place right now?
Are they first place in the Eastern Conference, second place in the NBA, first place in one of the latest NBA power polls?
Second week in the NBA power rankings as the best team in the NBA?
The team that just set their record for the largest margin of victory in the history of the league. Granted, not really much of a flex because of the team that they were going against, but nonetheless, yeah, they're pretty good. Opportunity might be there if they chose to capitalize on it. And I think the question is, do they push all their chips in the middle of the table? Do they, hold on to their card and feel like, if they were switching to blackjack in our gambling metaphors here, do they feel like they're close enough to 21 and the dealer's hand won't be better? Like, there's a lot of different directions that the Pistons can go. And based off of the reporting, I think we're probably going to get somewhere in the middle. I don't think they're going to be going and getting, Giannis Antetokounmpo, type player or, even someone, like just under that tier. But I don't think the Pistons are necessarily looking to walk out empty handed either, based off of the reporting and things that we've been hearing.
No, I think I agree with you. It's kind of in the middle ground. Like, I don't think they're going to go out there and trade like 3, 4 first round picks and half to the core for Giannis. But I also wouldn't rule out them being involved in a Giannis trade as a facilitator with their trade exception. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, we saw reports today that Minnesota is trying to be aggressive, and Brian Windhorst said that it could be like a 3-4 team trade. Like, I think it's probably going to be on par with probably like a Kevin Durant trade where you got multiple teams, multiple salaries going out, multiple teams getting involved in that. So I think it's just kind of the middle ground. I think the timing of that was almost like sneakily perfect by JB Bickerstaff saying teams going for it. I think where the Pistons are positioned, and when you kind of just talk about the Eastern Conference, Jason Tatum says, I'm not coming back this year. Boston's still a top seeded team in the East. We understand that Tyrese Halliburton is still injured. The Pacers are going to be a lottery team this year. I think there's a very good opportunity for the Detroit Pistons to attack this deadline and make sure that they're playing in the Eastern Conference Finals and possibly the NBA Finals to compete for a championship.
Yeah, look, I think it'd be naive to presume that other teams in the East aren't going to be trying to pursue the exact same thing. As good as the Pistons have been, I don't think anyone views them as this untouchable monolith that no one can overcome. I think people see them as a team that have, just like a lot of the teams in the Eastern Conference have clear, tangible weaknesses and limitations that could potentially, prevent them from getting where they want to go. Now, again, are they going to be giving up the moon, the stars to go and get like a top 5 player in the league? No, I just don't see, the Giannis thing. People keep talking about it. It's just not really much of a realistic possibility for one, especially when you talk about bringing in someone like Giannis, how much you'd have to give up. You'd essentially be changing your identity mid-season. And when the team is doing as well as it is, and mainly is doing as well as it is because of the identity that they've implemented, why rock that boat so mightily? Just for, potentially getting back to that level with what you'd have to give up in return, even with all the injury stuff that's in the mix. Because Milwaukee, that's not going to stop them from wanting to cash out and getting the maximum value they can get for their superstar.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that people don't really realize, it's like as soon as you trade for Giannis, you're probably giving him an extension, and the extension will be close to $300 million. Not to mention, like the Pistons right now, obviously, we'll talk about this player a little bit later, I'm sure. Like Jalen Duren is going to be getting a big payday. They have players to worry about, Nassar Thompson the following season for contract extension. So I think a trade for Giannis is a trade where you kind of have to look 2-3 years down the line to see, can we still be competitive in the conference that we're playing in? And what does our roster look like? What does our depth look like? And I think if you do trade for Giannis, your depth isn't going to be as strong as it currently is. And there's no guarantee this guy's going to stay healthy. I mean, you look at the guy's injury report over the past couple of seasons, Sean, he's had shoulder injuries, calf injuries, knee injuries. The way he plays so physical and smash mouth basketball. He's 31. I don't really know how long his body is going to keep holding up with just the way he plays basketball.
Yeah, and what does a 35-year-old Giannis look like? People have been talking about like what does Giannis look like over the years? Like what is the comparison for the way that he ages? And people have brought up that, where he's at right now is he's kind of like Lakers, like towards the end of Lakers Shaq, where it's like, hey, you have like a couple good years left on these tires, but it might fall apart, like the second. And it's also like one of those things where it's like, well, you also better make sure you manage his minutes and make sure he's healthy enough to be there. Not saying, that like Giannis is this fully depreciated asset and just not a good player, because we all know he's one of the best players in the world. And if you have an opportunity, in a vacuum to add him to your team, then, of course you have to at least consider it and have the conversation. But we're not in a vacuum. And if you step out and look at the scope of the situation, the story that has been the Pistons and the success that they've seen, a lot of it comes from the youth and the depth that they have, and condensing that depth and decreasing that youth and taking away guys like Nassar Thompson, who so clearly have so many more, stages to get to. And Ron Holland, who is not even scratching the surface of what I think he has the potential to do. And another guy who was just named a, first time All-Star in Jalen Duren, who you mentioned. If you talk about the ultimate bet on yourself season, he's about to be cashing out, with a pristine payday here this summer, assuming nothing drastic changes.
Yeah, I mean, when you just kind of talk about the core of this team and you talk about like where they're currently at, I think, not saying that like a trade for him wouldn't be a good trade. I agree with you. Like if you have an opportunity to add a type of caliber player like him, you do that. But I think where the Pistons are at, they're still very young. They're still trying to figure out the core of this group, like who's kind of like a top 1 option, a top 2 option, a number 3 option. Not to say that he wouldn't make sense on this team, but I find it hard to believe John Horse would want to trade him in the same division and see him 4 times a year.
Yeah.
I would not want to do that if I was him.
Unless you got the moon in the unless
Yeah.
it's like the Knicks and Nets trade where they got like far too much back for Mikal Bridges than what he was probably actually worth, and it was an overpay because of the rivalry, because of the interdivision aspect. I mean, let alone there's the intercity aspect, and I think it's literally been 80 years since those teams had made a transaction of any form with each other, but nonetheless, the Pistons and Bucks don't exactly make a whole lot of trades either. And, sure, they're like the Brandon Jennings deal was pretty cool for a bit. I don't know about you, but I don't think we're hanging Thon Maker's number up in the rafters anytime soon. And especially we don't want to talk about Chris Middleton, but the ultimate moral of that story is I don't think they're going to be going to get the big fish. And if they do go big fish hunting, I don't think it's going to be until this summer after, something in the playoffs has clearly dictated what this team should do going forward. Now, like you said, I think with the young core that they've had and the identity that they're clearly building, I think there's a clear understanding of, hey, we like what we have. And I think that attitude still exists. But at the same time, it's like, okay, as great as Tobias Harris is, as far as an off the court presence, as much as we like the potential future outlook of a Jaden Ivey and like him as a person and want that to work, if we have an opportunity to go get Michael Porter Jr., who could potentially slot in and be more seamless of a fit than a Giannis Antetokounmpo and not have to give up that same level of risk, I certainly think that's something you have to entertain. But the question is going to come back to, well, what do you give up? What does that deal look like? And so I know Brooklyn, is looking to get multiple first round picks for him, but does that change the equation if you throw in a Jaden Ivey on top of a Tobias? That's the question.
Yeah, I think the Michael Porter Jr. conversation has always been an interesting one. I've talked about him quite a bit on my podcast. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah.
But from talking to people that I know have podcasts like myself that cover the Brooklyn Nets, like the asking price has always been around 2 first-round picks.
Yep.
And they're looking for expirings. That's why you kind of just throw Tobias in any type of trade that's a big salary. But the one player that they've come back to me and said, like, hey, like, Jaden Ivey's a good player, but like the one player that we really like on your roster is Ron Holland. And it's just like, that's the conversation you have to kind of like ask yourself is, are you willing to give up on a young player that you just drafted to upgrade your power forward position with Michael Porter Jr.? Now, personally, I probably would not do that just because
Right.
I believe in Ron Holland's future. I believe in him as a prospect. I think he can be a two-way forward in this league. But if they lower their asking price, and I know Chris Mannix said this, as we get closer to the trading deadline, that the asking price for MPJ might actually go down to 1 first in expirings because they're just looking to stay in that top 5. Obviously, they lost by 50 to the Pistons, but I mean, if Michael Porter Jr. is in your lineup, I could see that team winning 20 games.
For sure.
I could see them winning 7 more games this year.
Yeah.
Does that kind of play you out of those odds that you want when you have Darren Peterson, AJ DeBanza, Cameron Boozer? Like, this is a really good draft at the top, and I'm sure the Nets want to have a pick in the top 5 where they could possibly have a franchise player.
Yeah, I think at a certain point, to your, kind of to go off of what you're saying there, you do have to kind of play a little mental calculus and go, okay, is the juice really worth the squeeze here of trying to get an extra first round pick when we could potentially be tanking the ultimate value of our pick, when the difference between getting a top 5 pick versus a top 10 pick in this draft is pretty drastic. Now you could still get a pretty good player, towards the bottom of a top 10, but it's certainly not going to be what you're talking about in regards to that top 5 or top 6 that we have, because those are all guys who could be going number 1 in their own different classes.
You know what their situation reminds me of?
What's that?
Reminds me of when we had Jeremy Grant here.
Yeah.
And we always heard reports that teams like the Celtics were going to offer up to 3 first-round picks for Jeremy Grant. But, Troy Weaver and company weren't really interested in, dealing a Jeremy Grant. Like, could the Nets have a similar type of situation where, they're getting multiple first round picks, but they just want to hold on to a guy that maybe they feel could be a piece for them during their rebuild? I mean, I think that's a whole nother conversation that we could have if you're willing to have it. But I mean, it almost mirrors itself in a sense when we had Jeremy Grant here.
Yeah. It also reminds me of Bojan Bogdanovic, where, it's kind of that question of, like, do we hold on to the player who we see as value, as someone who's playing really well? And listen, at the time, I was one of the people who was saying, hey, hold on to him. He's a good player. You're going to hope to maybe get someone half as good as him in the draft. But in reality, it probably would have done them a lot better just to move on and get whatever assets they could have gotten, because I can't even tell you in retrospect what they got in return for the Bojan trade to the Knicks. It wasn't nearly as much as what they could have gotten the season before. I know that. And it certainly wasn't anything that gave them like real tangible value. So yeah, I don't really think that, like looking at their standpoint, they, as good as a Michael Porter Jr. is, it's just like the question for them is, how long do they really think that's going to, continue at that level? And, like, what is it really going to get us if we keep them here? So, like, again, the Nets are in a very tricky situation. Watching them last night, there is certainly some young players there that are promising, but good God, that was as uncompetitive of a game as I've seen in my lifetime. I mean, literally in the history of the Pistons' lifetime.
If you've ever played high school sports, it's like when you were a freshman and the coaches were like, you're going to play varsity tonight. That's exactly what happened last night.
Or it's like if you're a part of Celtics media and the coaching staff's like, you're playing us.
Yeah, that's really tough. But I mean, I like some of their players. I was really happy Ben Surratt did not crack his head open last night.
Oh my gosh.
He landed on Ron Holland's leg and probably saved his life from some sort of CTE or concussion. That was terrible. Like they do have some young, intriguing pieces. I'm under the mindset they're probably looking for more wings. I don't really know if they want to have any more guards personally. Because I mean, you have Igor Demon, who that kid's going to be really, really good. Like I've been a really big fan of him. They have some players that just aren't with their squad right now. They're with the Long Island Nets in the G League, but man, like Sean Mark strikes me as a GM that's not going to be too patient. I don't really know if he's learned his lesson from the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden days, or even if you can go back to the KG Paul Pierce days. He strikes me as a GM that might just say, hey, we got multiple first. Giannis, come on down.
Yeah. Yeah, he might say F it, we all. And I mean, at this point, his mistakes haven't gotten him fired. So, I mean, what is there to learn from? He still gets the paycheck. If anything, he probably gets paid more today than he made when he first started. So, hey, literally no consequences. You can just be bad all you want. Maybe he should be the general manager of the Dallas Mavericks. Well, actually, maybe he doesn't want that. But
oh man.
Anywho, I don't see the Pistons making any move that's going to make you go, oh my gosh. Could it be a tier above like the Dennis Schroeder move perhaps? And it's like, like a Michael Porter Jr. It's like, that's certainly a guy who's on the verge of all-star, quality. When you talk about what he did this year, it's just, again, it's not going to be anything where, it's going to be on the level of like going to get a Jaren Jackson Jr. or, Donovan Mitchell's name is starting to getting floated around a little bit more. Even if that's someone that I think the Pistons should pursue, which let's say they flame out this year and they have an opportunity to put him next to Cade. Like, hey, I'm like, my ears are open, but at the same time, it's like, I just don't think, especially at this point in the season when, it's like, if you're a team like Cleveland where you're super desperate, okay, maybe a Giannis move makes a lot more sense for them. But again, when we're just talking about a historically good Pistons team here and as young as it possibly, and I think that's when you talk about the all-star conversation, where in years past, it's like, okay, Andre Drummond made all-star off of an injury reserve. Cool. What does that really say about where he's at in the landscape of the league? Whereas with Cade and Duren, Cade in his second all-star appearance is already a starter. was essentially the highest vote getter among his peers. And Duren made it in his third year. And I would argue the thing that really got him over the hump and, like elevated his game to all-star level. I wouldn't even say like the offensive production has gone up another level, but Anthony, I'd argue a lot of that is just his conditioning has gotten better. He could just go at a higher rate and, a higher intensity level. I would argue that's been like, if you're like, what's the number one thing that has brought Jalen Duren, which yes, I don't want to deny like the skill because his footwork's immaculate, but his footwork's been awesome since he came into the league. He's built like an oak tree, but he's been built like an oak tree since he was 18, 19 years old, probably long before that,
14.
Yeah. Like if I would argue if it's like, and he's talked about it himself of looking at Tobias and the way, that he and THJ, the way that they take care of their bodies and condition, to be able to play. I'd argue if you look at like what's allowed Jalen Duren to get to that level, I think it's a lot of that, to be honest with you.
If you were to go back and watch last year and the type of energy and effort he was giving, I think a lot of fans were very frustrated with his conditioning. And I think some fans pointed out that he just looks out of shape. He looks like he's out of breath by halftime. And I know Trajan had talked to you guys in the media. I believe it might have been like right after the playoffs ended or maybe during the summer about how he challenged Cade Cunningham and the rest of the team to get in better physical condition and shape.
Yep.
And I think you see that with Jalen Duren. He's not really doing anything different than he was last year. He's still putting the ball on the floor. He still operates out of dribble handoff situations. I think the one thing that you kind of see a couple times a game, maybe he does shoot a mid-range jump shot. Maybe he is kind of working in the post a little bit, but he's still catching lobs, still putting the ball on the floor. He's just in better shape. And it feels like he's gotten stronger just by looking at him. Like there's not too many centers that I think can actually like match him with physicality. He's just going out there and just playing bully ball. Like he had a play last night against Nick Claxton, and Nick Claxton went flying. And I was like, good Lord. Like I remember when Pistons Twitter was like, let's trade Jalen Duren for Nick Claxton.
Yeah, I was part of that crew. I'll gladly admit how wrong I was because there's points where like over the last couple of years, to your point, it's just you watch Duren and it goes, man, I know there's an all-star in there, but what is it going to take to get him out? And I think part of it was growing up. And I to be honest with you, I think it's kind of humbling to watch a guy in his mid-30s who, who's played for, 15, 16 plus years be in way better shape than you. I think that was probably a moment that was like a real wake-up call. And, I think like in part, like to your point, like, yeah, he looks stronger, but he, at the same time, he doesn't look like that much bigger than over the years. And yeah, he looks, like there's a lot of areas where it's like the volume with the efficiency is just still there. But I think a lot of that's just from the fact that he has gas in the tank to go and make those plays more, to run at the rim more. And to your point, there'd be times last year where you watch Duren and he's curling over, he's got sweat just dripping down his chin. Whereas now you watch him and it's like, there's points where he looks like he barely breaks a sweat.
Yeah.
And, the conditioning level that he's at now is just allowing, because the minutes aren't up drastically. The attempts are up by 4, but like the volume's matching it, which tells me, he's in good enough shape to be able to keep making those plays. A lot of it's just the capacity. Like if you just look at a lot of the numbers, it just comes down to the fact that he has the capability to do it more because of his conditioning. And so I think because of that, you're seeing a more aggressive Duren every single night instead of on flashes when he's feeling good,
Yeah, I think what Draymond Green said recently, I don't know if you caught it, because they were kind of talking about Jalen Duren, and he was just like, he's always had the body, he's always had the physicality. He's like, but he's learned how to use his body. And he's like, I'm not saying that he was out of shape or anything like that, but he's like, he didn't know how to use his physicality. He didn't know how to use angles. He's like, now he knows how to, use the tools that he has, like the God-given strength that he has. And like, that's a huge problem for a guy that's 22, that's about to enter his prime and is due up for a contract extension. Because you tweeted it out, like, I don't even think he's scratching the surface of the type of center that he can be.
Absolutely.
he hasn't even developed any sort of a consistent mid-range jump shot. That would open up his game even more, not for himself, but his teammates as well. Like we saw all the videos, and I know I we had a segment on my podcast this summer because I wanted to talk about him practicing open jump shots in an open gym. And you're like, I'm getting Andre Drummond PTSD vibes, Anthony. What the hell you have me on your podcast talking about this shit for? But like, if he starts to, develop a 3-point shot, he starts to develop a mid-range jump shot, on top of being able to put the ball on the floor. I mean, you're talking about a guy that could probably average 20 in his sleep.
Oh yeah, I mean he's practically on the doorstep. He's at 18.
Yeah,
So
like
I mean, like
2025 easily.
yeah, he could average 23, 25 a game if he, continues to. And then I think about the defensive, like the defensive things that we've seen this year and just how much he can even get better there. And, you talk about some of the offensive stuff. His footwork is naturally great. Could you imagine if he increases his repertoire and has moves that he can go to in the post to just make guys look silly, on top of the fact that he can also just straight up power through them? And, like you talk about, like if he can just tighten that handle, if some of the playmaking stuff just gets a little bit sharper as far as some of the turnovers, granted, the fact that he can do a lot of the stuff that he can as a passing big kind of makes you forgive some of that stuff sometimes. But even then, there's just moments that leave you scratching your head. And I think it's going to be a real, like telltale sign of his growth when you look at how he's going to play in the postseason, because there's going to be a lot of teams, like I think Boston specifically, they're really good at deterring or preventing attempts at the rim because they'll just swat at guys' arms and, cause turnovers and get steals. Duren actually struggled with that quite a bit in previous games against Boston this year. And I know that's going to be coming in the, come postseason time, like that they're going to swarm him. They're going to clog the paint. They're going to try to, deny him from getting the ball above his waist and getting it, getting even to a point where he can attempt a shot. And I think he's going to be able to play through it just fine. But like, it's certainly like I think we're going to see, just like those limits be tested. But the thing is, he's such an athletic freak. Like he's in such, like you said, he's gotten to a point where he's learned how to use those gifts to where it's like, it doesn't even matter most possessions. Teams can't even do anything but pray when they're having to guard him.
I know, like a former Piston, Luka Garza, who plays for the Celtics. I mean, the last time we played the Celtics, he was moving Luka Garza like he was a China doll. Luka Garza's a big guy. Like he's 250, really tall, 7 feet. I mean, he was just moving him like he was nothing.
And even Neemias Queta, he can only do so much, and he's a super big guy,
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just kind of scratching the surface of like what his potential could possibly be, and that's scary. And it's a good problem to have. I think a lot of people going into this offseason, they were kind of circling like, okay, who's going to take the next step in development? A lot of people were saying this is going to be a Star Thompson's year. I don't really think too many people thought that Jalen Duren was going to come in at peak physical shape and be the number 2 option most nights for the Pistons.
Yeah. I thought nights like the Dallas game in Mexico City, I thought those were going to be, almost kind of like outliers just because of the fact that, it's like, oh, well, they didn't even really have a big there. Like Daniel Gafford, like rushed back from injury. And even then he was on like a heavy minutes restriction, but it's like that almost like when you just talk about, again, people forget the elevation in Mexico City is insane.
Mm-hmm. It's worse than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that like during that entire game, like, yeah, like he was tired. Everyone was, but he was still like the most physically dominant, enduring player in that entire game. Like to me, it's like, I look back now. At the time, I was like, I wonder if he could sustain that. But now I look back and it's like, oh, that was the telltale sign right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had a little bit of a lull there in January, like for a good 2 weeks, but like the last week and a half, I think he's kind of just picked it up a completely different notch of, just go. I think he's averaging over 20 points a game over his last 5 games. He's just been really impressive. And I mean, he's going to have a really good opportunity tomorrow going up against Nikola Jokic, which
no doubt
should be a really good game.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be at that one. That's going to be one hell of a game. And, you just talk about the matchup problems that he gives teams like that, especially without Aaron Gordon, which he's going to be out for even longer.
Mm-hmm.
He can feast in that game, no problem. And like with Cade, like, I think it's, over the last couple of weeks or like the past week in particular, it's been really good to see these performances from him. Like, looks like the wrist might not be bothering him anymore. Because I think that was like a real concern, especially when you talk about how it affected, and it's still affecting Jalen Williams of the Thunder. But I think you talk about the fact of why Cade is so great. He had he had yet another game where he had he had over 3 blocks and 3 steals. I think he had 7 stocks in that game last night. He leads the league this season in games with 3+ steals and 3+ blocks. The only players who do it multiple times are Cade and Wemby. Cade's done it 3 times. Wemby's done it twice.
Ooh, I mean, man, that's an interesting stat that I just think of. How the Pistons really haven't had a guard like that to be able to just disrupt on both ends of the floor. I mean, you'd probably have to go back to like the Chauncey Billups days of him just disrupting, playing good defense, good perimeter defense, and just, clutch time. Like, you want the ball in Chauncey's hands. I feel like you kind of have a similar type of guard in Cade Cunningham where you want the ball in his hands in clutch time, the chase down block. Yeah, bigger, 6'6", 6'7", like around there. He's just I did not mean to do that on purpose. He is just such a fun guard to watch. The fact that he got voted in by his peers, like the #1 player vote, told me a lot about what other people around the league think of Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, I mean, people said it literally from his rookie year, man. I mean, people like Kevin Duren came out, Steph Curry came out. They're all like, that guy's the truth. And a lot of people didn't want to buy it. But now it feels like we got past the adoration stage already and are at the point where we just already take it for granted, which I'm here to tell you right now, we should not be doing, because just we talk all the time about these offensive, superstars who can carry the team on their back on that side of the court. And we never talk about the guys who are dominant on both sides. Don't know why, but I think when you have a guy who can so clearly and definitively affect the game that way on both sides of the court, that's the guy I'm taking the bet on to be, the #1 franchise guy going forward. And I'm already seeing lists of people listing Cade as having higher trade value than Wemby. Like, that's already happening.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I believe that, but the fact that that's even being floated out there.
I think that people just see the progression from like his rookie year to now. And like, I thought last year he took another step in development when Ivy went down in terms of scoring. And I think this year he understands that he can still get 30 on any given night. But I feel like this year his playmaking has been on more display, and he's taking better care of the basketball. Because I remember the conversation last year was just like, he's got to take better care of the basketball. He was turning it over at an extremely high rate. Teams were blitzing him because they knew if they blitz him, it's just going to be a turnover. And the Pistons didn't have a secondary option that could like really help them in games. But like, it's just the passing and then just the defense. Like, I was looking at Stat Defender, like Cade Cunningham in the month of January had the best defensive rating, Sean, of 101.0.
Pretty good.
Yeah, that's elite. That's elite defense.
Yeah.
That's a 2-way star.
Now, let me ask you this, Anthony, if that is your real name. Why is Cade taking this leap and a guy like Paolo isn't? What's the difference?
Sweet. I think when I look at Orlando, they're a very confusing team to me because they have a lot of athletes that like to run up and down the court. They're disruptive. And not to say that Paolo doesn't fit into their scheme, but Paolo to me is more of a half-court player than just a transition player. Like they have, like Franz Wagner can like go up and down the court, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black. Paolo plays more of a slower speed, and I think that's why we see so many games where he kind of takes ill-advised shots where you're just like, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
I think Paolo Banchero is a good player. I just don't think the way he's utilized with the Magic and Jamal Mosley right now best suits like where his strengths are at, because I feel like they try to force feed him in the post just to get him going when that's not really what Orlando wants to do. They want to move the ball side to side. They want to play fast. And not to say Paulo can't play fast or move the ball side to side and, assisting to his teammates, but I think he's just so used to playing a half-court game because that's what he did a lot at Duke. And he hasn't really translated it to the NBA game where, like, maybe I can play more fast. Maybe I can just run up and down the court, play defense. And maybe I don't need to, average 20 points a game. Maybe I'm averaging a good, 13, but my team's still winning. I think right now it's just a situation where Jamal Mosley is having a difficult time of, finding spots for him to, kind of take that next level like Cade did last year.
I think like guys like Cade and Paulo are both systems in themselves, right? But I think what the difference is whereas Cade is the type of system player where his excellence branches out to those around him, that his excellence accentuates those of his teammates. The way that he plays in it of itself is to make the guys next to him better. Whereas I think Paulo is one of these guys who, don't get me wrong, has all the gifts, all the tools, is as talented of a player as we've seen get drafted #1 in the last decade, But his game and his system is I'm going to put that ball in the bucket and I don't care how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And, whereas Cade's I'm going to make sure the ball goes in the bucket, but I don't have to be the one taking the shot. I can set someone up and elevate someone, get an easy look for someone else. I can get the best look. Whereas Paulo thinks the best look is whatever look he's going to take.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation for him. I can definitely see the Magic making a coaching change depending on what happens this year in the playoffs. There's been kind of like little whispers that Jamal Mosley and Paulo aren't seeing eye to eye, and that's really
and those are getting loud.
It's rare though, because when you talk to people that know Jamal Mosley, nicest guy, was Luka Doncic is favorite assistant coach. He's very well respected and loved in NBA circles. Now, maybe Jamal is asking a little bit more out of Paulo. Maybe he's demanding a little bit more of it out of his star player. Maybe Paulo hasn't had that type of accountability or coaching in his life and he doesn't like it. Yeah. I mean, that's something to kind of consider too, because I look at Orlando and I don't really think of Paolo Banchero as the face of that franchise. I think of Franz Wagner personally. I think Franz is the better player.
Well, and herein lies the problem that Orlando has, because you might be right. Paolo might not be their franchise player. He very well might not be their franchise player. But he's sure getting paid like he is. And he sure has power and leverage in his contract like he is. Yeah. And when you talk about, again, someone like Jamal Mosley, who has clearly taken that team to another level ever since he coached them and helped get them through this redeveloping stage. Now, it could be possible that he was the guy that got them from being bad to being good and then they need a guy who gets them from being good to being great. That's entirely possible. But as of right now, it seems like a lot of other guys are getting better and thriving as their career goes on. Seems like Franz has certainly improved, and sure, the shooting's not where you want it to be, but he's certainly gotten better in other elements of his game. Guys like, Jalen Suggs have thrived under his system when he stayed healthy. Anthony Black sure seems to be taking steps forward, in this system. So why is it that Paolo isn't the one? And sometimes I do think that just, sometimes it could be the chemistry and the fit of the coach and the player. That could entirely be it. But also, you do also kind of have to wonder and have questions about, is the maturity there? Is is he in the right mind frame? Because I think another thing you look at with a Cade Cunningham, we've been saying ever since he's come to the league, he's been 30 since he was 13. When you just talk about the mentality, the way that he just he is mature beyond his years. And I think why JB and him are such a perfect fit is because Cade is going to be one of the first people to take the criticism and the accountability and go out and act upon it. Whereas we've seen guys like Donovan Mitchell essentially oust him and get him fired for the exact same thing. So whereas here in Orlando, I think Jamal Mosley's probably telling Paolo what he doesn't want to hear, but what he needs to hear. And I'm sure Paolo still thinks, hey, no, just let me go to work.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation for them. I know when they made the Desmond Bain trade, I think everyone just like overreacted. They had them as like going to be like a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. And I remember texting you because we were in a group text. I was like, that team is expensive.
Yeah.
That's going to be a really expensive team. If they don't at least make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, they might have to kind of sell off on some of their guys, like a Jalen Suggs, who I think probably most likely is going to be off that team with the emergence of Anthony Black personally.
It's so
Um,
tough though because of how all the injuries he's had. How do you
yeah.
move him?
You just you find a team that's looking for a defensive point guard that when he's out there, he looks great. Um, but when he's injured, it does suck. I mean, I was watching the NBA Cup game against the Knicks. I mean, guy was playing injured, wrapped up all the way up to his mid thigh, and he was still going at the New York Knicks, Mitchell Robinson, all those guys. He looked great out there, but you can obviously Anthony Black is more available, just as good as a defensive player. But I mean, with the Magic, and as it does relate to Paulo, like I think they have to have tough conversations with their team if they don't do anything in the playoffs.
Well, and I think Orlando is the exact cautionary tale that you kind of have to look at if you are the Pistons of this is what happens when you spend your resources too early. When you think you've solved the riddle, you've aced the test, and you're like, this is what we need to bring us to the next level. Because the answer is not always true. Progress isn't always linear. And yeah, I think the Pistons are about on the doorstep right now to where they can start making some decisions because I do think they've been patient up to this point and have played this the right way. Because I think they very easily could have, last summer gone and, like made like the Lauri Markkanen trade. And I think a lot of people in this space would have praised him for it.
Oh yeah,
But there's a very good chance that couldn't have worked. Or there's a very good chance it wouldn't have worked to the level that they're working right now. And, sometimes, again, I'm not saying that the Pistons should just sit on their hands, do absolutely nothing, because I would disagree with that approach. This deadline, you have a trade exception. You might as well try and use it. You have a window here. You might as well try and capitalize on it. But again, like you said, Duren's probably going to be getting 50+ million this summer. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. Sar's going to be up for his extension. Kuz reported on this pod that the second that comes up, they already have it budgeted in. Like that's, like they, from what he's reporting, it's happening, So right off the bat, there are your 3 biggest contracts for the Pistons over the next half decade. And then Isaiah Stewart's coming up in a couple of years again. Ron Holland, you're going to have to make a decision about here in the next couple of years. You have, it starts to add up a lot quicker than people realize.
So you're under the opinion that Jalen Duren will be getting a max.
I think he's probably getting a max at this rate. If he keeps at this level, unless he comes out in the postseason, like if he ain't getting a max, he's not getting very far off of it.
I know the last time we talked, he was looking to get LP Sengun money, which is like close to 40 million.
Yeah.
I feel like the way the new CBA is, you can afford to pay 3 guys. And then you kind of just like get the mid-level, the biannual exceptions, and then kind of have your 2-way guys, which I think Trajan has actually done a really good job of that throughout his career.
Awesome job
with that. There are some guys that have been reported that we can maybe talk about a little bit later, but Duren at a max, I think, becomes a little bit difficult if you want to be competitive. It really does, but 50 million sounds like a lot because I mean that's like Joel Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns money.
I know. I get it. But I think with the level he's played, I think with how tight he and Cade are, and I think with the leverage he holds, I think he commands the ability. Now, look, it is a risk, 100%. But I mean, it's hard not to want to take a risk with how good he's been playing. But again, it's like, we'll see what he commands. But I can tell you right now, I think 40 million, I think the days of 40 million are gone.
Yeah, I don't know what he was asking for in the summer, but I mean, if you just kind of reflect, they probably should have offered him like at least 35 just to get the conversation rolling because I don't even think like he expected that he was going to have a season like this good.
Well, and I think something you do have to consider is, a lot of times we see the motivation of the contract here be something that is like a massive benefit. Now, we've also seen it in years past where players have that, have that dangled on the end of the chain. And then once they get it, they lose that drive. But I think where you can kind of feel a little bit better about Duren with that versus, like, for example, an Andre Drummond when he got paid the max is Drummond didn't have a Cade that was going to be there holding him accountable to be better each and every day.
No.
And I don't think Drummond had as good of coaches as there, because it's not like he had some like scrubs as coaches. I don't think Stan Van Gundy can as effectively have the conversation of, hey, we need more, as JB Bickerstaff can with him. I think the infrastructure they have, it allows them to take that risk a little bit more willingly. But again, I mean, it is definitely like we talked about. It's like, hey, if he comes out and like plays really well, you are taking a risk of that number going up. But at the same time, with the level that he's played at, it's like you're okay with paying that premium if now that like, okay, this guy has this in him and we've seen it now.
Yeah, then it kind of gets into like you don't want to get into a bidding war with other teams because they're going to, I think, at least 8+ teams with like actual cap space this summer. Because if you, let's just say, for example, you lowball them, you give like, let's say 39. What's stopping a team in Utah saying like, hey, we'll give you the 45 million that you want?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Especially with, in my opinion, with how close Cade and Duren are, and just going off of what we've seen in years past, where like Tom is not the guy that's, if he thinks you're worth it, he's going to pay the price. I just think they're going to give him, what he wants. That's just my educated guess. Again, I don't have any sources or anything. This is just going off of watching how this guy's operated for the last like 15 years,
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if the Pistons gave him a max, but I think it'll be fairly close. Like I'm still projecting like around 40 million, like anywhere from like 40 to 45, I think is probably what you could get him for. I'd be shocked if he got a max. I really would. Because like if he gets a max, man, and then he makes an all NBA team, you're like, can I swear on here?
Oh yeah, of course.
You're gonna say fuck.
I had to, but no, I mean, hey, how about we take a little pizza bet on it?
Okay.
How about this? Anything 45 billion and under, you win.
All right.
Anything 45.1 million and over, I win.
All right. Well,
I think that's fair.
We have video evidence now.
We have video evidence. We have live witnesses. Put in the chat that you are going to hold us to it, that you were here to bear witness. But anyways, Anthony, now I'm hungry thinking about pizza. Speaking of, speaking of teams looking to get a hot slice of the deadline here, what's happening in Cleveland? Because they go out and make this move. It's like, it's starting to make you do the windy fingers and go, all right, what's going on here? Because they trade DeAndre Hunter, which, I mean, clearly it just wasn't working out, for Keon Ellis and our old pal, Dennis Schroeder.
Mm-hmm.
And there's reports that they could potentially be trying to talk about Giannis. There's reports that they could potentially be looking at like Najee Marshall. It's like the reports are ranging all over the place. And I'm just at a point where I'm just profoundly confused, because if this is the roster, if this is the only move they make, I just don't get it.
It's really difficult because like they were a second apron team, well into the second apron. But I think you can kind of look at their team last year and all the success that Ty Jerome had. I think anyone could have told you trading for Lonzo Ball, you weren't going to get the same kind of production out of Ty Jerome. He's a guy that couldn't play in second night, so back-to-backs, a guy that has had severe injuries, and it just hasn't really worked out. I like the trade for them because I think Dennis Schroeder can fill a role. as a backup point guard. Darius Garland, from what I've heard, is actually getting close to coming back. But when you kind of talk about the teams in the Eastern Conference, there's floating out ideas that Jared Allen could be available for
Yep.
the right price. Um, I think it's just a team that's very expensive, that's in the second apron, and I think they thought it was going to be them and the Knicks as the top two teams in the East. About a week ago, they were like an 8 seed before they kind of went on this like little winning streak. They kind of
Yep.
put a good solid week of basketball together. But Cleveland is just a team that is very expensive, and if they're not winning, you best believe Dan Gilbert is going to be knocking on Colby Altman's door and saying, like, why am I paying all this money if we can't even make it to at least an Eastern Conference Finals?
Yeah. And quite frankly, you got to think he's pretty justified to ask that question when, they've given up a lot of money, but also a lot of assets. They fired JB Bickerstaff. They brought in, Kenny Atkinson. They've, made all of these moves, and it's not exactly, exacting into results. And sure, like, don't get me wrong, I think Keon Ellis is like a solid pickup. Were they really a Keon Ellis away? Are they really a Dennis Schroeder away?
No, I think it you just kind of look at the injuries they've had. It's like Max Strus, who's had a Jones fracture, was really big for them. Sam Merrill, who just came back from injury, their best 3-point shooter. Like, he was really a big piece for them.
Yep.
Jalen Tyson playing much better is probably a big reason why DeAndre Andre got traded to Sacramento.
For
But
sure.
like, you kind of just look at their team. Like, I don't really trust the Donovan Mitchell-led team to get to the finals when he's never even played in the Eastern Conference Finals in his career.
Yeah.
It's just a situation where, like, you look at Cleveland, they're very expensive. They might have to retool on the fly. I understand why they did make the Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis trade, which was kind of like a throw-in, which is kind of ironically hilarious given that the Kings were asking for 2 firsts for Keon Ellis, and then he got dealt for DeAndre Hunter, but that's just a Kings thing to do, I guess. That's a whole other podcast and a whole other
Yeah.
conversation for another
Yeah.
day. But yeah, man, I really don't know what Cleveland's doing. Like, it's just a situation where, like, they had to know Lonzo Ball wasn't going to be healthy and right for them. I don't know how bad the backup point guard market was during the summer, but like, I felt like they could have done much better than Lonzo Ball.
Yeah. I remember when he came back at the end of last year, like, even though he couldn't play in those back-to-backs, like he certainly didn't look bad in moments with Chicago, but it's like sometimes it's like those are just a couple of good months and some, short spurts of good play. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a guy who's historically had health issues is just going to no longer struggle with them and just be a good player for years to come. Like, that's just not entirely how that works. Before I let you go, if you were to make a bold guess as far as who do you think's like, what team do you think is going to be the most aggressive here as we get to the deadline? Because if I were to just go off of my gut feeling, I think teams like Miami are probably sick of middling, and I think they're probably going to try to make a pretty serious push towards Giannis. I think the Warriors are just desperate enough to go and do the exact same type of thing. And then I also look at, again, like we just talked about with Cleveland, it seems like they're going to start having some pretty serious existential conversations about who they are and who they're not. So those are just right off the bat. That's what I'm thinking of. Who are you looking at, Anthony?
In the East, I'm looking at Toronto.
Yeah.
I feel like they have a lot of tradable contracts, have multiple first-round picks. I wouldn't rule them out as a Giannis team either. They've wanted Giannis for quite some time, dating back to the Kawhi Leonard days before they traded for Kawhi. I would probably look at Toronto in the Eastern Conference in the kind of like the playoff circle.
Yep.
Another team in the East that I would look at that has been red hot, the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah.
Could Charlotte decide, we're right there on the in-season tournament. Like we should reward the good play. They're one of the hottest teams in the Eastern Conference right now. I could see Charlotte being somewhat aggressive, getting more size in the front court to kind of back up Musa Diabate. I know they just drafted Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Can I just say, if for whatever reason the Knicks did make the shocking move to move on from Karl Anthony Towns, this is kind of my favorite alternate cat destination. I don't want to mess up. Like I know they've had, I know some of the success that they've had is, from the young bigs that they have. And I don't want to necessarily take away from that. But if you want to talk about taking their offense and just like supercharging it, that'd be pretty fun at the very least. I'd watch that on League Pass nightly.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule Cat out. I mean, I know, Orlando was kind of just like dipping their toe in that type of.
Oh God.
I know, right?
I hate that for Orlando. I like that for Charlotte. I don't for Orlando.
Yeah, I think Charlotte could definitely be a team that, they might just say, like, screw it. Like, let's try to get that 8 seed. Let's try to get that 7 seed. We're right there. The teams at the bottom, Atlanta, Chicago, and Miami. I feel like Charlotte, just the way they play, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Pistons last year where, they start winning games, they start believing in themselves, and they're really fun and energetic. Definitely would look for them. But I want to give you some Western Conference teams, if you don't mind. I think San Antonio, to me, would make some sense. Yeah. They do have multiple first-round draft picks. They have just an absolute alien in Victor Wembanyama. Their core still kind of confuses me in terms of guards because they have like Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, De'Aaron Fox. Like who knows who's going to become available over the next 3 days? Like, could they parlay that into another 20, 25 point per game score next to Wemby and really try to knock on the door with OKC, who they've actually beaten a few times this year? I mean, I think San Antonio's knocking on the door right there. I wouldn't rule out also in the West. I just thought of them and then it just kind of like emptied my mind. I think New Orleans is going to head towards a rebuild. I think what they're going to do is over the next couple of days, they're just going to weigh out all their options. And I think you're going to see guys like Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, who knows that they move on from Trey Murphy. Sadiq Bey is playing really well. He might go to a contender. I think where they're at, they're trying to do two things at once. They're trying to rebuild, but they still want to be competitive. Right. I think you should just try to rebuild with Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen and maybe get a first-round pick in 26 since you don't have one. And just kind of you have two young guys. Who knows what you're going to do with James Borrego? Is he still your head coach? I'm not really sure, but those are the two teams out west that I think that could possibly make some trades.
One more team out east, Atlanta. They I think they're like when you just talk about desperation teams, I think they moved on from Trae Young, telling themselves they'd be more competitive, not less. And the Trae Young trade hasn't exactly been a smashing success for any side thus far. I mean, he hasn't even played in a Wizards uniform yet. I guess that's a win for the Wizards, but for Atlanta, like their defensive woes have certainly not gotten better. Kristaps Porzingis still hasn't really played much, if at all, for them this year. He's played in 17 games for the Hawks, which is probably not the amount they were hoping for when they traded for him. And I still think if you're all right, what team could be stupid and desperate enough to go get Anthony Davis? I still think they're on that list.
I saw this morning that Atlanta and Toronto were the two teams still interested in trading for Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
Atlanta to me is interesting because I like Jalen Johnson. I like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They traded Vic Krejci, which I know he's not a household name by any means. Corey Kispert took his role. I mean, Vic Krejci, shooting over 40% from three. Trailblazers completely robbed them off of that trade. Like they needed more 3-point shooting. Like outside of Caleb Love, like they don't have any good 3-point shooters. Like Vic Krejci was a really good player. I don't really know how you think Corey Kispert would be more impactful when Krejci is actually a better defender and can put
Yeah.
the ball on the floor and assist. But I mean, that's an Atlanta situation to deal with. But I mean, Anthony Davis to the Hawks, I feel like it would just kind of be like a play-in team for the next like 3 to 4 years, and then you're stuck on his contract and he wants an extension. So
Yep.
I think whoever trades for Anthony Davis is a team that might regret it in a year or two.
Well, did you see another guy who's already available again? Miles Turner is already in trade rumors in Milwaukee.
Oh boy.
So yeah, man, a lot. I think this is going to sneakily be a lot more interesting of a deadline than we've been led to believe. And I think some of the names that could be on the move, we haven't even fully discussed yet. So I think the Pistons are certainly going to be players, but I think you're going to see some Eastern teams who don't respect them a lot. They're going to try to be pretty desperate to overtake them. And I'm not saying they're going to succeed. It could be a spectacular failure. That's before we even talk about all the guys on the Kings who could be traded. Who knows? Like who knows if a team convinces themselves that they're a Zach LaVine away? You know? I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying it could happen.
I mean, Sabonis could be on the move too.
That is true. That is very true. Anthony, you're a guy that isn't going to be on the move, though. You're going to be staying right where you're at doing the great content that you're doing over on Pistons Talk on all social media platforms and the Pistons Talk podcast, part of the Believe Network, sponsored by FanDuel. Anthony, thank you so much for joining the pod, man. Especially on short notice. You're a real one.
I owed you, man. You're on my podcast. I feel like at least once a month. Anytime we get to do these podcasts are a lot of fun. I'm proud that like we've done back-to-back podcasts and we haven't gone down rabbit holes.
This was actually a pretty on track podcast. I was surprised. We didn't say anything that almost got us demonetized.
No, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk off camera because there's a couple things you said that I almost just like, no, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm not going to do it.
I look forward to hearing about that. But thank you to those who tuned in as well to this podcast. Be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content that we have coming up this week. I have a couple more really good pods with some really good guests coming later in the week. So be sure you're in tune for that. But that's going to do it for today, folks. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.